Good afternoon. It's 4:15 here in Cincinnati, and we begin the first of our four chapters in the marketing section of Introduction to Business. As I mentioned in the earlier email, we have four chapters to cover in marketing, and we may not be able to conclude all four chapters or finish all four chapters in the allotted amount of time. If that's the case, we'll move chapter 16 to next week. Because we had some confusion last week about the lecture question, I will pose the lecture discussion question at the end of the presentation for chapter 14, which should occur in about an hour or so from now. Chapter 13, marketing, helping buyers buy. And let's look at our learning objectives. Define marketing and apply the marketing concept for both profit and nonprofit organizations. Describe the 4 P's of marketing. Summarize the marketing research process. That's very important. Show how marketers use environmental scanning to learn about the changing marketing environment. Explain how marketers apply the tools of market segmentation, relationship marketing, and the study of consumer behavior. And then we're going to do some comparison here and also later as we go through the marketing chapters, comparing business to business market and the consumer market. All right. So the question posed here is, what is marketing? And certainly you can read what's on the slide here, but what makes up marketing is all the things that go into what it takes for the marketer to deliver his or her message or his or her company's message, and showing the customer that that product or service being marketed has value and has value to them, also, notice as well as to all society. Now, remember, one of the things about marketing is to, and there's many ways we market, promotions, advertisement, etc. And we'll discuss those as we go through these chapters, I should say. It is enticing you as a consumer or as a business person to make a purchase. And then, of course, there's other things that go into that marketing. Marketing doesn't stop, or the process doesn't stop once the purchase is made. Now, here, this just gives us some information, and we're going to talk about the different eras of marketing. We're helping buyers buy through the use of the internet, where people can almost instantaneously, and I use that term almost because it's not exactly instantaneous, but it's very close to it, compare prices. Much different today than what we did years ago, where we had to walk from store to store or look at a newspaper or a magazine or something that gave us information about price comparison. So we have a lot of information, if you will, at our fingertips to do a lot of comparison shopping, if you will, without ever leaving the comfort of our home or office, if your office is comfortable. Some may not be. And some, of course, are very comfortable, depending upon your position with the company. But we give things that information now, and there can be a one-way exchange. That's you looking and getting the information, or the information being delivered to you, and it also can be interactive. Now, these are the 4 eras that marketing has gone through: production, selling, marketing concept, and then customer relationship era, which we are in today. So let's examine these and see if we can put a little understanding to them. The production era really is exactly what it says. There isn't anything hidden in this message. It is, as the slide says, as the bullet number 1 says, produce all that you can because there is no limit to the market. And of course, we know that's not true today. It wasn't true in those days either, but that was the idea. And so then most of the things in those days came from that production area came from our mass production. And then we had to take that mass production, and then we really had to persuade people to buy. Just because you have a product out there doesn't mean people are going to buy it. If you've seen the movie Field of Dreams, one of the lines is there is build it and they will come. Well, that's just not necessarily true. Could be in some cases if you had something that everybody absolutely had to have or absolutely needed is probably a better way to put that. But those things are rare today. So we have to stop and think about something different. So then we move from the production era to what was commonly called the marketing concept era, which followed World War II. And notice that what it says here, what it says and what it implies, and I'll give you what I say it implies. And it's pretty much the same thing. In World War II, we had 12 million men. Now, I'm only counting the men. I'm not counting the women because I've never seen a statistic for that. We did have a number of women in the military. And of course, we had a number of women who worked in defense plants that supported the military. Well, what I want to say here is that when those men in uniform demobilized, 12 million of them, they were going to come home and they were going to want things that they had not been able to get while they were in uniform. And so what the producers understood was they had to be able to respond to the needs and wants of the consumer who's returning home. And he or she was returning home with a good deal of money in their pockets. And they wanted to spend it because they hadn't been able to spend it. Or what they'd been able to spend it on had been restricted. Restricted by meaning there weren't that many goods to buy, and there were only certain goods you could buy. So in applying the marketing concept, which really followed what we just talked about, we had to have what was known here as a customer orientation. In other words, we had to be in tune to knowing what the customers wanted. We had to have a service orientation, meaning we had to provide all the things the customer wanted besides the product. You just don't you just don't provide a product or service and then walk away. There are other things that are required for you to do. And then, of course, you had to make money doing what you were doing. If you didn't make money, you'd be out of business pretty quickly. So that's the last piece of it, of the marketing concept. So we have moved away from the marketing concept era into what we know today as the let me take this back just a second here. The customer relationship era. Customer relationship era, and then we have a thing called customer relationship management. Now, this simply says that we need to find out as much as possible as we can about what our customers want and need. And then we have to do all the things that we possibly can to satisfy those needs. And look at the next word, exceed them. And why do we want to exceed? Well, we want to exceed because we want repeat business. And yes, we may get repeat business if we satisfy the customer, meet meet his or her expectations. But as soon as somebody else comes along that exceeds those, that customer is going to go elsewhere. And then we need to try, as it says here on the second bullet, to establish, the marketers do, long-term relationships with customers. That is, getting customers to come back. And when I'm skipping ahead a little bit here, when I delivered this class or taught this class in a face-to-face setting, I would always ask students, what one product is it that you will not take a substitute for? And the answer is varied across a wide spectrum. And that's the same thing here, because you want to know what the customer wants, and then you want to be able to deliver that so that customer gives you repeat business. And that repeat business isn't just tomorrow and the next day and the next week and the following week and the month after, but it continues year after year after year after year. And the last bullet just talks about a couple of companies, Priceline and Travelocity, that develop long-term relationships with customers to get them to return. This particular slide talks about service with a smile, steps to keep customers happy. And I'm not going to dwell on each of these, but there is a couple that I think we really need to point out. One is appreciation. Your genuineness and appreciating getting that person's business shows through, and that's something that has to continue time after time after time after time. And then building trust. I think that's very important, because in many cases, a sale is made upon the trust that's made between the marketer, the seller, and the buyer, not necessarily the product. Now, I'm not going to tell you the product isn't important. It is important. But that trust is developed between those two people. So that is something that's really important. We're going to pass on this particular slide. Not that it's not important, but we're going to pass on it. Nonprofit marketing includes many of the concepts that marketing for for-profit companies does. But it's a little bit different. There is public relations. They're trying to change public attitudes, which comes through public relations, which comes through advertising as well. Of course, the for-profit sector tries to do that as well. But there are other things that they're trying to do here. They're trying to increase their membership. They're trying to look at things about the environment, and then they have special campaigns and things of that nature. All marketing, different ways of marketing. We're not selling a product here as much as we're selling an idea or help for the community or something of that nature. We next move to what are known as the 4 P's of marketing. And here we talk about the marketing manager and the marketing mix. And the 4 P's listed here, and you can see this graphically displayed, figure 13.2 on page 367. The product, its price, the place where the product is available for purchase, and then finally promotion. One of the things that all companies do before bringing a product to market is to do something which is known as test marketing. Test marketing is done in a number of areas around the country, may be done in your area, I don't know. And it also may be something that you may never see again. Because the product either didn't satisfy customers, or they weren't interested in it, or for some other reason. I remember when I was stationed in the St. Louis area, when I was in the Army, my wife and I used to eat at a local family-owned Italian restaurant quite frequently. And I remember being in there one time, and the grandson of the founder asked me if I would try a product that I didn't normally try, and then give him a little feedback about it. And I said, sure, and I did. And I told him that I happened to like it, and you know, if it was there again, I would purchase it. Very funnily, that was if that's the right word to use, I think that was the last time I saw that product. And it was made by a national company. It wasn't something that was fly by night or anything of that nature. It just wasn't around. Obviously, because the vast majority of their customers didn't really want that product. They wanted the old product. Not that they were going to replace anything, but they didn't want the new product. And so that's what test marketing does. And by the way, test marketing is usually conducted in an area that has a wide spectrum of people, both incomes and education and a few other type things, so they can get a pretty good sample of how well the product is being received in a certain area. And of course, brand name. We're going to talk about branding later on tonight, this afternoon. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it right here, but it's something that calls our attention to a particular product. And in some cases, a brand name, quote unquote brand name, has actually been transposed to a whole spectrum of similar product. For instance, now I don't know so much today, but for a long period of time, if you wanted a facial tissue, you would ask for Kleenex, even though Kleenex is a brand name. It is not the name of all facial tissues. The same thing was true for a long period of time. If you wanted a cola, people would ask for a Coke because it was what people referred to when they wanted a soft drink that was cola flavored. Obviously, we know that that doesn't necessarily hold true today. The final one I want to mention to you is Scotch tape. Scotch tape is actually Scotch brand tape, which is a product of the Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing Company. More about them later. And it refers to cellophane tape. But all cellophane tape is not Scotch tape. This gives you some kind of an idea of the things that people face. So one of the things we have to do is we have to place a product and we have to price it. So we're going to talk about pricing it first. And there's some considerations in pricing, and they're mentioned to you up here. Certainly the competitor's price is important, but more important than that is what it costs you to produce the product. And of course, that takes in everything. It takes in the salaries and electricity and other utilities and things of that nature. And then may also be some cost for distribution. And that is getting your product from the warehouse or the production site to the selling site. What's it cost you to transport it there? So that all goes into figuring out how you're going to price product. And of course, there are high and low price strategies, which we're going to talk about later in greater depth. And then, of course, middlemen, normally referred to as wholesalers, although there could be some other thoughts or agents and brokers and things like that. They're important in this pricing because they do add to the price. So they're also important because they help get the product to where people need it. And we're going to talk about those folks. They're called intermediaries a little bit later in the presentation this afternoon. Promotion takes in all these type things. And again, we're going to talk more about promotion when we get to chapter 16. But it's all the things that a producer uses, all the techniques, I want to say, that a producer uses to entice people to, one, think about buying the product, and then two, to eventually making them getting them to make a purchase. And it includes personal selling and advertising and promotion, word of mouth, public relations, etc. Perfect promotion, I don't think there is such a thing, but we can use some of these things here and put them in our mind. And notice the thing here, use emotion-laden advertising. I don't know if you think that when you see advertising connects to you or with you on an emotional basis, but many people do. And I like to call that type of advertising something that's a grabber. It grabs your attention and it plays on a particular area of you, your emotions. Now that people might think, well, that's dirty pool. No, it's not. You're trying to get people to buy into something, and you want to make it emotional. And if it is emotional, we tend to hold on to that a little bit longer. That's just human nature. This also talks about being a likable salesperson and the things that he or she needs to do to help convey a message and get a person to make a decision to purchase a product. And I think the two bottom ones are probably as important or more important than the others. And that is to show that you're interested in the buyer and you're interested in helping him or her make a decision and letting them see that that product you're selling is good for them, and then being respectful. Enthusiasm, of course. You're not going to sell something if you're not enthusiastic, but you have to be respectful to the buyer. Well, one of the things that any marketer has to do is to do what's known as market research. He or she must understand the market in which he or she is trying to move a product, sell a product, and then find out what the challenges are. Competitors, all sorts of things. And notice that it talks about challenges and opportunities. Now, if you move into an uncharted territory, you should have unlimited opportunity. That does not mean to say you won't find challenges, but you should have unlimited opportunity. So marketers use the research to help them discover what it is people want or need, what it is that they are looking for that they can't find elsewhere. And it also helps us give marketers some idea of where that particular target market is moving, what its trends are, what its attitudes are, et cetera, et cetera. And then notice it also uncovers or can uncover attitudes held by the company insiders and stakeholders. Sometimes one of the things that holds marketing back, if you will, is the very people who are in charge of the organization making the product and bringing it to people for sale. So notice what the first thing here says, the 4 steps in the marketing process is called defining the problem. I like to say it's not always a problem, it can be an issue. Problems, a lot of times problem sounds like negative, and that's why I like to change that around a little bit. And you have to figure out, pardon me, where you are today. And that will help you understand if you can meet the issue and you can solve the issue that's being presented. So you have to get the data that you need, the research data. That data must be analyzed and turned into useful information. And then you have to choose among alternatives to decide what is best, implement that solution, and then follow up and find out if that was the right solution and to have implemented. So here we're going to go back to the 4 issues we talked about. Where are we today? Alternatives. What type of information do we need? Or let's talk about data. And then we're going to turn that into useful information. And then how are we going to get that? All right, so let's take a look at some ways to gather that data. We can use what's known as secondary data. Now, there is nothing wrong with secondary data. However, you have to understand that that data was gathered by someone else, and it is not necessarily meant to give you all the answers that you need. Notice also that many times it's free because it's been gathered by government sources, and that access is open to everyone, and therefore it should be used. But again, it's not primary data, and as the last bullet says, and as I mentioned before, it may not give you all the answers that you're looking for, but it's a good place to start. Primary data, on the other hand, is that is gathered by your researchers. And it's done by different methods. Notice here, and I'm going to give you, not all of them can be done by phone. It can be done by mail. It can be done online. It can be done through focus groups. Those are all ways to get primary data. Now, a focus group is a good way to get data, but I have a caveat to that. Focus group is gathering people and then getting them into a discussion with a discussion leader to find out about their opinions. Now, what I say by that is that there's a little difficulty here, and the difficulty is this. If you decide that you want to gather data from a focus group, the person who leads the discussion has to be trained and has to be knowledgeable about that. Because in a focus group, the discussion leader will ask what is normally known as an open-ended question. And once a responder gives that his or her answer, the focus group leader then will ask that person to expand on that. He or she may take a tidbit of what was said and say, what did you mean by this? So that person has to be trained about doing 2 things. Number 1, knowing how and when to ask follow-on questions, and then how to record those responses. So it gives us an accurate picture. So I only caution here is if you get involved in focus groups, and they're good, make sure that the person who is the discussion leader knows what he or she is doing, is trained to do that. All right. So that's the primary data for focus groups. And then we have to analyze it, as we said before. And it's going to take this raw data, turn it into useful information. And then we do that to help plan strategies and make recommendations. But probably before we make strategy, we actually make recommendations. Once the recommendations are accepted and we decide where to go, then we have to have an implementation strategy. That's how I would approach it. That doesn't mean you can't have a strategy first, but I think that you're better off going through the recommendations and making sure that you've got what you want there before you set a strategy, because recommendations may not always be taken. And then obviously, as we mentioned before, once you've implemented a strategy, you have to evaluate it to ensure that you selected the right one, and whether or not it has to be changed as you go down the road. So here where our benefits of market research or marketing research are. We get a chance to analyze customers' needs and their satisfaction if they've been met. We get a chance to see how well our strategies are working. And then to analyze the market process and tactics currently being used by us, by others, to make sure that either we continue with what's there or we make the needed and necessary changes to do better. Now, we already talked about ways to find out what customers want and how we were going to do that by telephone, by mail, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, focus groups. And I'm not going to continue this because it can be continued forever, I suppose. But this just comes along here with supporting some things we've already said and brought to the forefront. I guess the last thing I would say down here, the last bullet, is what commonly is referred to as a secret shopper. And that person poses as a customer and sees what kind of treatment he or she gets in the product and so on and so forth. In continuing with the research, this is what this particular slide talks about: scanning the marketing environment. So you're looking for different factors here that impact on the marketing. And this is graphically, but we're going to show this next in the slide, or actually two down on the slide. A figure in the text, which is 13.5 at the top of page 373. And here we're looking at environmental scan and identifies various things: global factors, technology, socio-cultural, competitive, economic, etc. I'm not going to talk about this particular thing, and this is the marketing environment that we talked about. Again, the figure, notice the customer in the center, the 4 Ps concentrically arranged around the customer, and then we have the various factors that all impact on the marketing environment. These are the ABCs of marketing. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on this. You can read this yourself. I think many of these are pretty much self-evident, certainly A, being customer focused and maintaining that. And then B, I think, is another one which we have mentioned before, and that's benchmarking. You want to look at your tactics, your techniques, your strategies, and measure them, as opposed to, I'm using that as instead of benchmark, but it's the same thing. Measure them against the top performing organization in your field and see how well you stack up. And you make adjustments as you think that you need to do that, as you need to do. Now we have 2 markets, and only 2 markets. I know we've talked about consumer market excuse me, I know we've talked about other factors and seemingly other markets here, but there are only 2 markets. One's a consumer market, that's us, you and me. We are what are known as end users. We do not take the product we buy and resell it or use it to make something else for sale. I want to point that out to you because yes, we do go to the store and we do buy certain products and then we turn it into something else, but we don't take that something else and sell I'm not going to say that your children, when they were younger, haven't taken Kool-Aid or lemonade, made Kool-Aid or lemonade at home and then sold it to the people coming up and down the street. That's different. By and large, we don't do that. And if we do it, we don't do it for profit. So we do it for something else. Business to business is much different. Here, individuals and organizations buy product or goods and services that they use in producing other products and goods and services that they eventually sell or they supply to others. Or, they, of course, as mentioned here, they could rent them. So the business-to-business market is entirely different than the consumer market. So in marketing to consumers, we're going to have a little bit different approach here because there's a difference in the size of the market and there's a difference in the diversity of the market. And because of that, the producer can decide where he or she wants to put efforts to reach a certain part of that market. So we have market segmentation, and we divide the market into wedges, if you will, that have similar characteristics. A target market, on the other hand, is selecting a segment or segments where the organization can be profitable. In other words, where it can sell its product and earn a profit. So how do we segment the market? We can do it by geography, pretty easy. We can do it by demographics. That's by age, income, ethnicity, etc. Education also falls into that category. Or we can do it by what's known as psychographic segmentation. We're dividing the market into those that hold similar values, interests, etc. Entirely different than the first two, and of course important to any organization wanting to make a profit. Then we have also benefit segmentation and volume segmentation. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on either of those. Now, segmenting the consumer market, which we can see here in figure 13.6 in the text, talks about different things that we've already talked about, and I'm not going to go into that. You can read this in the text for yourself. But there should be some lecture notes about it as well, and we have already discussed that. And this again is more on the consumer market, and we're not going to discuss that any more than what we already have. Niche marketing is a little different. This is where an organization identifies, notice the term it uses, a small but profitable market segment, and it sets up its products, designs them to fit that market. One-on-one marketing is exactly what it says. This is going after the individual customer. We have things known as mass marketing. Again, a concept that's fairly easy for us to understand. And then we have relationship marketing, which we talked about earlier. And mass marketing is exactly what it said. It's for the masses. It's for large numbers of people. Or relationship marketing, here we focus on custom-made goods and services. A little bit different. Here are the keys to successful relationship marketing. Notice what we have here. We've talked about a little bit of this before. I'm not going to go over all of these, but I think the fourth bullet is very important if you're doing relationship marketing. Trust, honesty, and ethical behavior. Hello? This is what we do, and this is what we as consumers do when we make a decision to buy a product. We have a problem. Again, it's an issue, something we need to satisfy. We look around for any information, evaluate the choices, make a decision to buy, and then we evaluate that decision after the purchase. Did we make a good decision or not? Obviously, we want to turn negatives into positives, and of course, this is talking about online evaluations. There's a problem with that, or there can be a problem with that, so companies have to be aware of that. Notice what it says here, key factors in consumer decision making. People learn and use reference groups, it's their culture, subcultures, etc. These are the things that we go through when we make a decision. Now, someone's going to tell me, well, listen, I go to the store and I buy a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk and I don't pay any attention to that. Well, yeah, perhaps the day you walk into the store, you don't pay any attention to it. But somewhere in your history, you have been, I'm going to use the word programmed here, don't think of that as negative, to buy that certain loaf of bread or to buy that specific gallon of milk that comes from a certain dairy, because that's what you learned. That's how you grew up. That's a decision your mother made or your father made or both of them made. And you're just following that along. Nothing wrong with that, but that's what we do. Here are problems that we have in the business-to-business marketing area, and notice that we talk here, by the way, I made a mistake here. It's both. It's both the consumer and the business-to-business market. Look at brand awareness and budgeting and increasing profit and all those kinds of things. Business-to-business market is made up of manufacturers, wholesalers, hospitals, government, other institutions besides hospitals. Would be schools would be in that. And notice here that the product that is sold to one of these people in this business-to-business market can be resold, can be used to make other product, as we said before, and it's around. A product can be around. Now, this particular slide gives us an idea of the differences between business-to-business marketing and the consumer market. And you can see this graphically displayed in your text, figure 13.7 at the top of page 381. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but there are a couple of things I think that stand out. When you're in the business-to-business market, the norm is large purchases. Buyers, those people who are purchasing the product from you, are trained. They go through a regimen of learning how to be a buyer. We consumers have no special training, particularly. Now, yeah, certainly if you are an automobile mechanic, you probably have a better idea of buying an automobile because of what you've done. But the normal person doesn't have that. He or she makes a decision based upon other information. Notice that the last thing in buying procedures, buying is done from multiple sources where a consumer rarely buys from multiple sources. So there are some differences there. I encourage you to read them and to look at them and to become a better consumer yourself. That brings us to the end of chapter 13. It's 5 o'clock. We're going to take a 3-minute break to 5:03. We'll come back and start chapter 14, developing and pricing goods and services. Please come back at 5:03. Thank you. All right, 5:03, we're back, chapter 14, developing and pricing goods and services. Our learning objectives for this chapter are to describe a total product offer, identify the various kinds of consumer and industrial goods, summarize the functions of packaging, contrast brand name, and trademark, and show the value of brand equity, explain the steps in new product development, describe the product life cycle, and finally, identify varying pricing objectives and strategies. Okay. Now, this comes from, notice the slide starts out with, according to the American Marketing Association, value is the foundation of marketing. And I think we probably can agree to that. And look at the definition. It's something that is of good quality at a fair price. And so we have to understand that adapting products to new markets is going to be a continual challenge. At the same time, it provides a lot of opportunities. And product development and getting a new product to market is key for any business that wants to remain competitive. Now, businesses today, American businesses, are fighting a lot of issues that are beyond our control. Right now we have a strong dollar, which means that goods that are sold overseas are much more expensive. And so the fluctuation of the currency, and we'll talk about currency valuation and fluctuation next week, or actually in week 7, it plays a big part. But that doesn't mean that the marketing needs to stop. It means that there just happens to be other challenges. Now, those not going to talk about that are products that people won't give up. Those are interesting, but there's other things we need to discuss. Now, one of the things that's important, we mentioned before in the 4 Ps, is making sure that we have the product at the place that people want to buy it, or that people frequent so they can buy it. So there's something called distributive product development. That's handing off some of what you do to other people, many times overseas. And of course, we have a lot of outsourcing, and I'm not going to get into that because that's a different issue. But this type of outsourcing is a little bit different here because we're putting an American company, if you will. What we have here is a picture of McDonald's. We're putting that in a foreign country, operated by foreign people, but it's still American. Whether that falls into outsourcing or not, I'm really not too sure, and I don't think that it does. So I want to stay away from that just a little bit. Total product offer. Notice that what this says. This is what your customer evaluates when he or she is going to buy a particular good or service. It's everything. It's not just the way the product looks, not just its size or its feel or something else. It's everything. And notice what the second bullet says. Those are both tangible things, the things that we can see and feel and touch, maybe even hear, as opposed to the intangibles, which are very difficult to define. So how do we figure this out? We have to think, we marketers have to think like the consumer does. And because if we don't, then we're going to be giving them a product they don't want to buy. Just a second here, I'm in the wrong place, and you'll just have to bear with me, if you would. Now, this particular slide, which you can see is figure 14.1 in your text, shows this is the potential components of a total product offer. And we have all sorts of things. The price on the outside up here on the upper left, packaging down here on outside upper right, convenience, brand name, speed of delivery, reputation, guarantee. All of those things are considered by the buyer before he or she makes a purchase. Now, I realize we talked about this before. We go in to buy a supermarket to buy a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk or something else. We say we don't go through all that, and yet we do. We absolutely do. We go to a particular store because we like the store surroundings. We buy a particular product because of the reputation of the producer. It's not something that we absolutely say we think about all the time, but we do because it's programmed. And we don't have to make that decision every time, go through all those steps, because we've already programmed that in our computer that we have between our ears. And it gives us all that information. And it also gives us information for alternatives if the product we're looking for doesn't happen to be on the shelf for whatever reason. Now, this particular slide gives us, talks us and introduces us to the product line, and then we're going to talk about product mix. A product line is where all of the products in that particular area, group is a better way to say that, are either physically similar or, as it says here, intended for a similar market. So what it gives us here is Coca-Cola, Diet Coke, and Cherry Coke, and Coke Zero, et cetera, et cetera. Two things are apparent here. All of those products are physically similar. If we would hold each one of those four that are mentioned up, we would notice very little difference between them. Now, the Cherry Coke may have a little bit different color to it because of adding the cherry. But other than that, they're going to look the same. I didn't say taste, I said look. And they're intended for a similar market. Those people who consume soft drinks or sodas. They're not intended for something else. Now, that's a product line. A product mix, on the other hand, is different product lines offered by the same manufacturer, or as it says here, a service provider, and what they mention here is Procter & Gamble, a large consumer products manufacturer that's headquartered here in Cincinnati. And you know, you can buy toothpaste made by them, cosmetics made by them, diapers, batteries, etc. Now, Procter & Gamble, interestingly enough, for this slide, Procter & Gamble has been shedding itself of some products, so you may not be able to buy all of those things, but certainly you may buy laundry detergent, shampoo, and things of that nature that they still do make. So that's the difference between a product line and a product mix. And we're going to pass this particular slide. Now, here's a trick, and I do intend to use that word. I don't mean dirty trick, but it's a conundrum for people who are making the same type product. How do you differentiate aspirin, bottled water, fast food, etc.? Well, fast food, pretty easy. I mean, somebody's selling burgers, somebody's selling pizza. Pardon me. But you have to differentiate your burger and your pizza from your competitors. Not an easy thing to do. So you have to do it in some fashion that makes it stand out. So use advertising, packaging, and what you're trying to do is to create, as it says here on the slide, something different. So that everybody, when everybody thinks of laundry detergent, for instance, a particular name comes to mind. Tide or All or New Era or Purex or something else. That's your programming, again, your audience to buy based upon your differentiation strategy. Some people will tell you laundry detergent is laundry detergent is laundry detergent. And what differentiates them is the particular additives that are put in to the detergent to attract certain customers, like bleach or something else. Now, there are classifications of consumer goods and services, and one is convenience goods, and we've talked about those readily here in the last few minutes. Milk and bread. And this is where you or I go into a store and make a purchase of something like that, and the other things that are mentioned on the slide, we don't give a lot of thought to it, because that purchase has been pre-programmed in us for a long period of time. So these are convenience goods. And we move from convenience goods to what we call shopping goods and services. Here, notice what happens here. The consumer, us, we're only going to buy a particular product after we've evaluated for its quality, its price, style, perhaps, and a few other type things. And here are the laundry list, of things that we fall into this category: clothes, appliances, furniture, home remodeling, things of that nature. Then we move to what are known as specialty goods and services. Notice that there's a brand name attached to these things. And we're looking here at Tiffany jewelry, Rolex watches, and things of that nature. Unique characteristics, and we're not going to find these products every place in town. It'll be limited. There may only be one place we can buy these, or maybe two, but not too many more than that. Very, very limited. We're not going to be around looking at those in a lot of other areas. And then unsought goods and services. Things like funeral services, car towing services, insurance, renter's insurance, things of that nature. Not products we're not aware of, but products we don't think about until we absolutely have to have them, usually due to some unforeseen circumstance. Now, industrial goods, again, a little bit different. These are things we're going to find in the business-to-business market. And notice what these include. Capital items would be machinery and things of that nature. Supplies, accessory, equipment. Something we're not going to find in other areas. Now, this gives us a graphic display, if you will, of categories of industrial goods and services. This can be found figure 14.2 at the top of page 397. And notice we also show here the consumer goods and services on the left-hand side. And then we show industrial goods and services on the right-hand side, production goods, support goods, etc. And then down here, things like raw material, etc. And then if you look at the figure in the text, it will also give you the ancillary things like installations, accessories, etc. Now, what is important here for any good, not service, but for any good, is packaging. And companies spend a lot of time thinking about packaging and how they want their product to look in a package, etc. And packaging provides many, many pluses. And the slide here talks about, key functions of packaging. I like to use the term pluses because it is telling something about the product that is important to the consumer. Now, first thing a package does is gets our attention. We like the color, we like the way it's laid out, all those kind of things. It provides protection. This one I always have trouble with because it talks about ease of opening. And I think most of us know that's not always true. But still in all, you want to be able to do that. Tells us a little bit about the product. what it's used for, etc. And then it gives us a warranty. Tells us what will happen if we don't like the product and how we can return it and things of that nature. So that's why we have packaging. We don't always think about it, but packaging does provide certain uses, and then it's something that we do. This is another part of marketing, and this is a thing called bundling, where we get kind of like twofers, 2 for 1. And exactly what it says. We're getting something too, and we're only paying one price because we get them as a unit. Virgin Airlines is mentioned on here. Financial institutions bundle advice along with purchases, and so it's something that we do see, and many people take advantage of it. Now, here we're going to talk about branding and understanding branding. It's a little bit different here. We tend to mix and match terms, even though when we do that, we really kind of know what we mean, but we're not exactly 100% correct. A brand is something that we associate with a particular product. It can be a name, it could be a symbol, it could be a design. All of those are very important. And it distinguishes this particular product from a competitor. A trademark is a little bit different. Here, a brand has, through the patent office, the trademark office, I think it's through the patent office, has exclusive protection to use the brand name and the design, and nobody else may infringe upon that. And names are trademarked. There was a lawsuit several years ago by Victoria's Secret against an outfit in, I believe it was in Louisville, Kentucky, that was in the same business, sold women's lingerie and other type garments, and it went by the name of Victor's Little Secret. And Victoria's Secret sued for trademark infringement. And the court that heard the case upheld Victoria's Secret's suit. And it said Victor's Little Secret, in its wording, was actually infringing upon a trademark. Now, we may think that that's the big guys, Goliath slaughtering David, and in some cases that may be true. But companies work hard to differentiate themselves. And if they have a trademark and it's been recognized, it should not be infringed upon. This is just talking here about different types of things, and it talks about very vegetarian, which we've not talked about. So we won't get into that at the present moment. Now, these are some brand categories that we need to pay attention to just for our own edification, if you will. Manufacturer's brand. Notice that this is something the manufacturer produces and distributes usually on a national basis. Doesn't have to be, but tends to be. A private label is something that's different. Products carry a retailer's name or a distributor's name instead of the manufacturer's name. Now, what's the difference here? The difference is normally priced, because that product, if it carries a distributor's name or a retailer's name, is usually going to be made by the same manufacturer, but it's sold for less. It's sold for less money. And we have things like generic goods. They're sold at a discount compared to what the manufacturer or dealer's brands are, and the knockoff brands are exactly what they say. They are illegal copies. There's brand equity and brand loyalty. Brand equity is the value that an organization believes comes from its brand. And there's a lot of money involved in that equity. Brand loyalty is the degree to which you will not make a substitute, or you will not accept a substitute. You're not going to make any further purchases or any other valuations or evaluations because you want that particular product. Brand awareness is just simply how easily that we identify with a particular brand when something comes to mind. Somebody says, what's your favorite cola? Somebody responds Coke, or somebody responds Pepsi. That's brand awareness. How quickly that comes in. And brand preference is simply said, I prefer this brand to that brand. Now, that doesn't mean that you won't use that other brand, but you prefer this one. And then brand insistence, no substitutes, please. Thank you. Don't go away from me. Don't bother me. Brand association, linking a brand to favorable messages with the geography, perhaps, or with celebrities, as mentioned here. The brand manager is the person who's responsible for a particular brand and all the elements in the marketing mix for that particular brand. Product screening, it just simply reduces the number of new products a firm is working on, and then product analysis, looking here at cost estimates, sales forecasts, and others to get the idea of what we want to do. Now, this particular slide that we're going to talk about talks about new product development. And this is something that is very important to all companies, something that they go through, and it's one of the reasons that we go through this. You'll see that sometimes we never see the light of this new product, never sees the light of day. Now you can see this figure 14.3 toward the bottom of page 402. So somebody starts with an idea, and that could be based upon customer need or wants or whatever, or perhaps even improvement, something we already know. So then we're going to screen the product. We're going to see if it's something that we really want to do. And what this also says here is that it's going to reduce the number of new products that we want to think about developing. Then we analyze what we have. This is coming up, which we talked about before, cost and et cetera, to produce and to get it to market and the rest of that kind of stuff. And then we're going to develop the product itself. It could be a prototype if that's necessary. And then we're going to test the product. And we'll go to a test market and do that. And then if that test is successful, by the way, it's mentioned as concept testing in the text. If that test is successful, then we're going to bring it out commercially. And we have got to go through all those steps before we can decide whether we have a product that is viable. And this is how we do things there. This gives us a little bit different way of talking about it. Here's concept testing and commercialization, which we've already talked about. And then we're going to skip that particular one. And we're going to come down here to what's known as the product life cycle. This can be seen at figure 14.4 at the top of page 405. And we have four categories: introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. And you can look at this in your text, and it will give you some kind of an idea of where particular products are today that we knew of at one time. For instance, we have hybrid cars and electric cars. Electric cars considered to be, by the way, it says all electric cars considered to be an introduction, whereas hybrid cars, which are a combination of which my wife and I have a hybrid car, are in a growth pattern. Now, if we stop and think about this, and if the production moves the way we think it's going to move, and if the consumer behavior moves the way we think it's going to move. Now, I'm not talking about this movement being quickly. Hybrid cars will eventually go into a maturity, but I think they'll go into decline quicker than maturity if the electric car takes off the way people in the market think it will. I'm not saying that it will or it won't. We also have to remember that many products stay in a maturity category for a long period of time and do not go into decline. Tide detergent is one I can think of. Tide detergent's been around as long as I can remember. And it's still, as far as I know, the #1 leading laundry detergent in sales in not just the United States, in the world. So it's something we think about and don't just think that because of the way the slide and the figures show that something automatically goes from one to the other. This gives us a little more information about the product life cycle. This could be seen figure 14.5 at the top of page 406. And then right beneath that, by the way, you can look at that and see how that goes, what happens in each stage, and how they move. And then we go from there to really what's important to think about these four cycles, and that's in figure 14.6, which is right beneath that. That introduction notice the big opportunity introduction over at the far right. They have few competitors. In growth, however, you're going to get more competitors. But notice you have high profit. Now, maturity, and this is what I talked about maturity, we have to be careful about this. Because we can't say that this is complete overall. It says we have declining profits. That may or may not be true. And then decline, of course, that's understandable. Falling sales, and then obviously we're going to get into a lot of problems and be out of business quickly. There's, pardon me, these are our pricing objectives, and we have to get a return. We have to make sure we're getting some type of traffic, whether it's traditional foot traffic or traffic online. We want to get more of the market. We want to have something that people identify our product with, or they think of us and identify the product. And we may have some social objectives. So we can do things like target costing. We design a product that meets the firm's target profit. Competition based, in other words, we're going to sell somewhere around what the competition sells. We can have break even, which is not a good strategy, because if you break even, you're not going to be making any money. And if you're not making any money, then you don't need to be in the for-profit business. We have total fixed costs. assuming that all of our costs remain the same, which probably is not going to happen. And that's notice regardless of how much we produce or sell. And then variable cost changes according to the level of production. And then we have some pricing alternatives. A skimming price, that's when we have a new product and we have a few competitors. We can get high profits and we need to strike while the iron's hot. Penetrating price is exactly what it says. We're going to establish a price that helps get us in the market. And if we're big enough, we can discourage other people to come in. Now, this is a problem for the small person, the small business. He or she many times wants to say, I've got to compete on price, and they set the price too low, and then they find out they can't make any money, and now they have to raise the price, which is very difficult. If you want to be successful in a small business, don't compete on price. You want to compete on service. And in everyday low prices, what some of our large retailers do, we set prices lower, or they say their prices are lower than their competitors, and there are no sales. Specifically, no special sales. Finally, you can have a high-low pricing. Notice here that this is what is higher than the ELDP people do, except when they're going to have special sales, and then they're a lot larger. And then psychological prices that make us think the product is less expensive than it really is. Well, we've reached 5:36. We're going to take a break to 5:39, and we'll come back and do chapter 15. And we will not try chapter 16 tonight. And as promised, here is the lecture discussion question for this week. Compare the concepts of the production era with those of the customer relationship era. What are the differences, if any? What are the similarities, if any? Again, compare the concepts of the production era with those of the customer relationship era. What are the differences, if any? What are the similarities, if any? We'll be back shortly at 5:39 with chapter 15. All right, 5:39, we're back, chapter 15, distributing products. Again, as I mentioned, we will not attempt chapter 16 this evening. Learning objectives explain the concept of marketing channels and their value, demonstrate how intermediaries perform the 6 marketing utilities, identify the types of wholesale intermediaries in the distribution system, compare the distribution strategies retailers use, explain the various kinds of non-store retailing, explain the various ways to build cooperation and channel systems, and finally describe logistics and outline how intermediaries manage the transportation and storage of goods. All right, we have a lot to cover and we need to be started. Marketing intermediaries. These are firms that in some cases take possession of goods and or services, but mostly goods, from business to business and business to consumer and help them move them along. They're called intermediaries because, strangely enough, or not strangely enough, they're in the middle of the distribution system. And the channel of distribution is all the marketing intermediaries, or a group of them, that get together to transport and store goods or store and transport goods from the manufacturer to the consumer. We're going to skip that slide. These are the types of intermediaries that we have: agents and brokers. These people do not take control of the goods. They don't come to them, but they bring buyer and seller together and facilitate an exchange. Actual term is they don't take title. That means they physically don't have them. A wholesaler, on the other hand, is an intermediary who does, in most cases, take possession of the goods and then sells them, or resells them, perhaps is a better way to say that, to organizations or to individuals, normally to other retailers or manufacturers and institutions. Now, I mention individuals because in some cases that happens. Now, that tends to be pretty rare, but in some cases it does happen. And then a retailer is an organization that sells product to us, the end user. Now, this particular slide is rather very busy, I believe, and it gives you an idea of channels of consumer goods and channels for industrial goods, and we're not going to pay a lot of attention to that slide, although you can see it in figure 15.1 on the text, but it brings all the different intermediaries in there. We have intermediaries because they can do a couple of things. Number one, they can do the marketing tasks a lot quicker than the manufacturers can do, in some cases less expensively, and they can get the product where people need quicker. Notice what they do. They make the market more efficient by reducing transactions and contacts. Now, somebody's going to say, wait a minute, I can go to Dell and buy a computer. Yes, you can. I can go to Apple and buy a computer. Yes, you can, but Apple has stores today. They may be work for Apple, but they're doing the same thing that an marketing intermediary does. But for the vast majority of product, you can't do that. And if you would look at figure 15.2, which we're going to show next here, you can see what a manufacturer would have to do to keep in contact with all of the customers that want his product. Now, can you imagine Kellogg cereal selling cereal out its door to every person in the United States that wanted a box of Kellogg cereal? First of all, it's not going to happen. Everybody and their brother and sister is not going to drive to Battle Creek, Michigan. It's just not going to happen. It's not physically impossible, but it's not going to happen. Battle Creek, Michigan is not big enough to hold all the cars manufactured in the United States. Can you imagine what kind of a traffic jam there would be? So we have intermediaries for that, known as supermarkets and corner grocery stores. And they facilitate that exchange, and they make it a lot quicker than you or me getting into our automobile and driving to Battle Creek, Michigan. And if we did drive to Battle Creek, Michigan, we wouldn't buy just one box of cereal that we do when we go to the supermarket. How many we'd have to buy, I don't know, but I mean, we have to stop and think about that. So a lot of people say, well, let's get rid of these people. Well, yeah, okay, we'll get rid of them. But the functions they perform can't be done away with. And it's just, yes, it adds cost, but it adds convenience, and that convenience overwhelms the cost or ameliorates that additional cost. Yes, the third bullet there says. By the way, this slide gives you total distribution costs. It's figure 15.3 in your text at the bottom of 422. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but you can see where your distribution cost goes, and out of every dollar that the farmer only gets a buck. Now, the market intermediary performs 6 types of utilities. They're listed here: form, time, place, possession, information, and service. Form: changing raw material into product you want to use. Time: makes the products available when you want it. 7-Eleven does that. Other convenience stores do that. They're open late. Many supermarkets are open late too. Now, they may have reduced staff, but they're open late if you want to shop late. They've done that because people ask for that. Would Kellogg's stay open late? I don't know. Probably not. And again, we don't have the ability to do that. Place utility: products where you want it, when you want it. That goes back to time, but products where you want it. Possession: they have the product, they can transfer it to you quickly. And shows how the payment here. Information: it's available to you. And then service: going to provide service after the sale. Now, there are wholesale intermediaries. We've talked about those. And they make, for the most part, they make business-to-business sales. But as mentioned here, notice that Costco and Staples perform both wholesale side of the business and also retail. We know more, we consumers know more about retailers because that's what we do on the most part. But sometimes we use a wholesaler and we may not realize it. Ordinarily we don't, but so often we do. Now, we have several different types of wholesalers. We have a merchant wholesalers. These are folks that own their own business. They're not owned by someone else. And they actually own the goods, take title to them. And we have 2 types. We have full service and limited function. Full service, they do everything within the distribution channel. Or limited function, exactly what it says. They're only going to do certain things. Now, here are some limited function wholesalers. We have several here: rack jobbers, cash and carry, and then drop shippers. Rack jobbers, they furnish the racks or shelves for merchandise, and they display them, and they're sold on consignment. Cash and carry is exactly what it says. You come in, you buy certain goods, and you pay for them. Usually people who do this are smaller retailers, and there's a limited assortment of products of these cash and carry folks. And then drop shippers, they take orders from retailers and or other wholesalers and then have the merchandise shipped directly from the manufacturer to the buyer. These fall into the areas of agents and brokers. Now, and look at here at where an agent. These are people who develop long-term relationships with their customers. They may represent several manufacturers and tend to work in a specified geographic area, like within a certain state or within certain counties of a state, or maybe in certain other geographical areas that are larger than just one state, say like the Northwest Territory or New England or something of that nature. And then a broker is similar to an agent, but normally they only represent the seller and the buyer on a temporary basis. So you don't see them all the time like you do at an agent. And remember that neither of these folks take title to the goods. Notice this slide says there are over 2 million retailers in the United States. And it also says not including websites. Very interesting. And they employ about 5 million people. So that's a huge chunk of our employed people. Now this just gives fastest growing retailers by category. Something here about preventing coupon fraud. Not going to discuss that a whole lot. How to prevent return fraud. Make sure you require sales receipt. A look at tampering, etc. Now, these are the type of retail stores. I think we need just to look at them a second. Department store would be something like J.C. Penney and Nordstrom would follow that. Sears. Discount store would be Walmart and Target. Supermarket, we know what those are. Convenience store, specialty store, outlet stores, etc. Macy's, by the way, would be up with a department store, and we have convenience stores, etc. Here are some ways that we see with retail in their distribution strategies. You can have intensive, selective, or exclusive distribution. Now, exclusive is exactly what it says. And remember, we kind of talked about that. We were talking about specialty goods and services. Mainly only one store in a certain area. That would be exclusive distribution. Intensive, we're going to get as many products as we have in as many stores as possible. Retail stores. Selective is exactly what it says. We're only going to be in certain stores, and we're looking for certain customers. So maybe we want to say this is actually looking at a target market here. We're not going to put them every place. And we may avoid some areas. For instance, we may avoid an industrial area simply because we don't think shoppers will go to an industrial area, which is set up to manufacture goods. So we're going to be outside of an industrial area. And that selective distribution may be even more refined than that. We may want to go to areas where there are colleges and universities. Or on the flip side, we may want to avoid those areas. There's a lot of non-store retailing, and selling. So social, we have things called social commerce. And then I skipped one here, electronic and telemarketing. We certainly know what those are. Other forms are direct selling. That would be going to people's homes and doing things like that. And then, of course, direct marketing, which we know is also a different way of selling. Here we're linking, notice here what we're doing here, linking manufacturers or their intermediaries with the ultimate customer, end user, that's us. Now we have 4 types of distribution. Corporate distribution systems, which we're going to talk about here in a second, contractual distribution systems, administered distribution systems, and then supply chains. A corporate distribution system is where the corporation owns everything. It owns the manufacturing and it owns the retail outlets. And it controls how it distributes. Examples given here are Goodyear Tire and Sherwin-Williams Paint. Contractual distribution systems. Here, the members within this system are bound by a contract, by agreements. So then you have here, notice here, 3 types. You have franchise systems, McDonald's, etc. And you have to buy from McDonald's. You don't buy from anybody else. You get your distribution from McDonald's, not from someone else. Wholesale sponsored chains like IGA, Independent Grocers Association, and Ace Hardware. And then retail cooperatives. You also have True Value, which is different from Ace. Ace is wholesale sponsored. True Value is retail cooperative. An administered distribution system, where here the producer takes care of all the marketing functions at the retail level. And the 2 examples given here are Ralph Lauren and Kraft Foods. Supply chain, on the other hand, various organizations come together to cooperate in the movement of goods and services from the source, notice what it says here, raw material, to the ultimate consumer. Now, the ultimate consumer here may not be us, the end user, but for the most part probably is, but may not be. For instance, if you'd move coal to a power plant, that would be something different. Now, supply chain management is what has to be done. Sometimes this is called logistics. And by the way, there are fields of study for supply chain management today at colleges and universities. We don't have one here at Union, but there are colleges and universities that do have them. This is managing everything within the supply chain. That's movement of goods and services through to the consumer, and in some cases, back to the manufacturer. Now, this particular slide gives you a graphic of both channel of distribution and the supply chain. We can see this in the text. Get to the figure 15.7 at the top of page 433. Notice the first 4, manufacturer, wholesaler, retailer, consumer, that's the channel of distribution. Whereas going back to the supplier's plants and then adding the other 4 areas is actually the entire supply chain. Excuse me a second. Man. Jesus. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to conclude this tonight. I have an emergency here. I beg your pardon. I'll be back with you again next week. Thank you and good night.